welcome to today's episode of Empowered Divorce Decisions, where we discuss the information you need to know to make good, informed decisions in your divorce. Today, we're talking about a topic that is sometimes very emotionally difficult and usually one of the biggest decisions when it comes to the asset division, because it's usually the largest asset on the marital balance sheet, and that is the marital home and options for splitting the marital home in divorce. And before we dive into today's topic, I'm ELINA Cannon. I'm a private wealth advisor and divorce financial planner here at Argent Bridge Advisors in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Joining me today is Cécile Hult, who is also a private wealth advisor and a divorce financial planner and one of our firm partners. Thank you for joining, Cécile.
Hi, Lena. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Cécile, we would love, if you could kick it off and discuss the options for the marital home, since it is such a critical, it is a big decision. It's usually one of the biggest asset decisions, but it's also very, very emotional. Brings up sometimes good feelings, sometimes bad feelings, sometimes both at the same time. For that reason, I'd love to hear from you on what is the first option for the marital home.
Sure. I'll start with the easiest, which is not always people's preferred option. Oftentimes we'll say someone feels really strongly about the house and wants to keep it, but the easiest thing I would say would be to just sell the house. Basically put the house on the market, agree on a realtor, and then just sell it and split the proceeds. I would say the main benefit of this is that you just have immediate liquidity. You don't have to give up another asset to buy the home. I mean, of course, you'll need to live somewhere at some point, so this may be an oversimplified view, but it's also very fair because sometimes people disagree on the value of the home. So if you just list the house and split the proceeds, then you and your spouse are going to walk away with essentially the same amount, or marital amount anyway. From a tax perspective, it's also very advantageous. We're located in Northern Virginia here, so we see a lot of homes that have appreciated a ton in the past few years, and it's really not uncommon for people to have over $250,000 or even $500,000 of appreciation in their home. And it's good to remember that when you go and sell a home, if it's been your primary home for 2 out of the past 5 years, then you get to exclude $250,000 of capital gains in the sale of the home. But if you sell it jointly, you can even have $500,000 of capital gain exemption. So it is an attractive option from a tax perspective. What is your other typical, or what could be another recommendation from your perspective, ELINA?
Absolutely. So the next option, certainly the next most common option that we see, is where one spouse stays in the house and essentially buys out the interest from the other spouse. And usually the way that's done is through a credit and offset from another asset. Sometimes what that means is, say, for example, for simplicity's sake, there's $200,000 of marital equity in the house. Then half of that is $100,000, very simplistic example. There's other considerations, of course, such as house selling fees and taxes and whatnot. In this very simplistic example, half of the marital equity is $100,000. So in this instance, the spouse that's staying in the house would essentially forego $100,000 from another asset, potentially retirement, potentially checking savings, for the interest in the house. Another consideration when one spouse stays in the house and buys out the interest from the other spouse is the mortgage.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it's a huge one. especially in today's environment. We're in the spring of 2024. Mortgage rates are very, very high right now. And usually mortgages are not, if there's both spouses on the mortgage, usually the only way to get the other spouse off the mortgage is to refinance. And that is not very attractive if you have a mortgage with a 3% mortgage rate and the prevailing prevailing mortgage rate like it is today is say 7.25%.
Mhm.
That means that your monthly mortgage payment, when you refinance from 3% to 7.25%, is going to more than double. So
Wow,
and
that is
yeah,
it's really big and hard to qualify for people, right? Some people went from being able to qualify for that refinance to not being able to qualify for that refinance.
absolutely. So with the lender, you'll need to qualify. And what that means is you need a certain level of income because the mortgage lender is going to ask for all your financials. They're going to look at this really important metric called your debt to income ratio. So you need a certain level of income to qualify really to even refinance the mortgage in your own name. If you're not, a high income earner on your own and relying potentially on support payments for that income, sometimes mortgage lenders, they want to see 6 months of support history, and they
Mhm.
want to see that support in order for it to qualify for the refinance for the mortgage is going to last another 36 months. And that can
Mhm.
be accomplished just by the settlement agreement, by having support be essentially described and the term be defined in the settlement agreement. But it is a big consideration, especially that mortgage payment, well, qualifying to refinance and how much that total mortgage payment is, as well as the total home carry cost, right? Because to own a home, it's more than just the mortgage payment. It's the mortgage payment, it's
Right.
all the maintenance, it's the repairs, it's interior upkeep, it's exterior upkeep. It's
Mhm. Qualifying for the mortgage is one thing, but being able
yeah,
to even afford that mortgage in light of your other expenses is another thing too. So that's definitely a big consideration.
absolutely. And so because of this, we are seeing in today's environment a lot of spouses agree actually to defer a buyout or defer a sale for a little bit, which brings us to option 3, which Cecile, could you speak to?
Right. It's not always the simplest and it's not always the cleanest, but we have seen a lot more of co-ownership in recent months just because as Lina highlighted, it's not necessarily easy for people to buy out a spouse or refinance or assuming a mortgage might not be a possibility either. So we've seen a lot more people just say, hey, we're going to not necessarily live together. We're not saying live together, but we're going to continue owning the home together until the kids graduate high school, until 2 years from now, until I retire. Um, just so that it's a little bit simpler from a financial perspective. So people don't always love this because you remain on the title with your spouse. Usually one person stays in the home, the other spouse moves out of the home, but you continue both being on the title. So this is where you need to set very clear ground rules. You know, who is going to pay for what expense? Am I going to be responsible for if I'm not living in the home, am I going to be responsible for every little expense that's maintenance related? Or am I only going to be responsible for the big expense or only responsible for the mortgage and so on and so forth? And if you agree to continue paying that mortgage together, then it becomes very important on the back end when you're going to actually sell this house, who gets credited for appreciation on the home. So there's a lot of there are a lot of calculations that can come into this, but I would say definitely in this case, it's so important that you rely on strong language from your attorney in your property settlement agreement. And then it's very important that you rely on your financial professional CDFA for the calculations that go with what would be your marital equity in the marital home if you were to sell it jointly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. Did I forget anything, Elina?
The one other item that is good to iron out and detail in the settlement agreement is who gets that mortgage interest deduction.
Ooh, that's a great
Tax
one.
returns.
Good point.
Yeah. And I will say that I think back in the day when interest rates, mortgage rates were lower, we would sometimes see this co-ownership maybe for 6 months, maybe a year. But with where mortgage rates are now, we are seeing a lot more settlement agreements where the spouses are agreeing to this co-ownership for 2 years, 3 years down the road, sometimes even 4 years because of the environment. And there is actually some language you can also put in your settlement agreement that's called a contingent liability clause. And we actually talk about it a little bit more in the mortgage options video. So I will refer everybody to that video to learn a little bit more about the contingent liability clause. But that is a good option to include in the settlement agreement if you are agreeing to this co-ownership arrangement, and the spouse that is essentially the outspouse, the one that has moved out of the marital residence, if they have an interest in obtaining any other type of like new loan, like a new mortgage or a new car payment, this would help them essentially qualify for it. And that, of course, is something to talk to your team of professionals, your financial advisor, your mortgage lending professional, talk to, if you're interested in car loan, talk to the car loan, the bank too as well. And then if you have any questions, please reach out to Cecile and myself. We'd be happy to answer them. Our information is on the slide and in the show notes. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you stay tuned for next month's episode of Empowered Divorce Decisions. We hope you stay informed and stay empowered. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.